The courthouse was packed with people that Tuesday morning. Reporters crowded near the front, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Lawyers shuffled through papers while worried family members sat in the gallery. But all eyes were on the small figure sitting in the witness chair, 8-year-old Tommy Martinez. Tommy's legs didn't even reach the floor as he sat there, wearing his best clothes that his grandmother had picked out for him, a crisp white shirt, navy blue pants, and shoes that squeaked when he walked. His dark hair was neatly combed, but a small cowlick stuck up in the back despite his grandmother's best efforts. The boy looked tiny in the big courtroom, but his eyes showed determination that surprised everyone watching. He gripped the arms of the chair with his small hands, knuckles white with nervousness. The judge, a kind woman named Judge Patricia Wells, leaned forward slightly. "Tommy, do you understand why you're here today?" she asked gently. The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to tell the truth about what happened at the palace." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This case had captured the city's attention for weeks. A young boy was accusing Captain Richard Hartwell, one of the most respected royal guards in the country, of wrongdoing. Captain Hartwell had served the royal family for 15 years without a single complaint. He was known for his honor, his dedication, and his spotless record. The captain sat at the defendant's table, his military uniform pristine as always. His medals caught the light from the courtroom windows. He was a tall, imposing man with graying temples and kind eyes that had earned him respect from everyone who knew him. Next to him sat his lawyer, a well-dressed woman who had handled many high-profile cases. Tommy's story began 3 months earlier during a school field trip to the royal palace. His third-grade class from Lincoln Elementary had been excited for weeks about visiting the magnificent building where the royal family lived. They had studied the palace's history, learned about the royal guards, and practiced their best behavior for the special day. The palace was everything the children had imagined and more. Golden gates, manicured gardens, and guards in their ceremonial uniforms standing at attention. The tour guide, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Patterson, led the group of 25 students through the public areas of the palace. Tommy had always been curious about everything around him. While other children focused on the shiny decorations and fancy furniture, Tommy noticed details others missed. He watched how the guards moved, how they communicated with small gestures, and how they kept their eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual. During the tour, the children were told about the Royal Guard's important job of protecting the royal family. Captain Hartwell himself had appeared briefly to speak to the students about duty, honor, and service. The children were amazed by his uniform and the way he carried himself with such dignity. Being a Royal Guard is the highest honor, Captain Hartwell had told them, his voice strong and clear. "We take an oath to protect and serve with honesty and courage. Every day we prove ourselves worthy of the trust placed in us." The children had clapped enthusiastically, and Tommy had raised his hand to ask a question about the guard's daily routine. Captain Hartwell had smiled and answered patiently, making Tommy feel important and heard. But something happened that day that would change everything. Something that only Tommy saw, and something that would eventually lead them all to this courtroom. After the official tour ended, the children were given 15 minutes to use the restroom and get a drink of water before boarding their bus back to school. Tommy had finished quickly and wandered back toward the main hall, fascinated by a large painting of a historical battle scene. As he stood there studying the painting, he heard voices coming from a nearby corridor. The voices were hushed but urgent, and something about their tone made Tommy step closer to listen. He knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, but curiosity got the better of him. Through a partially open door, Tommy could see Captain Hartwell talking to another man in an expensive suit. The man was not wearing a uniform and looked nervous, constantly checking his watch and looking around as if afraid someone might see them. "The arrangements are all set," the man in the suit was saying. "The money will be transferred tonight just like we discussed." Tommy didn't understand what they were talking about, but something felt wrong. The way they were whispering, the way the man kept looking around nervously, and most importantly, the way Captain Hartwell was acting so differently from how he had been with the children just minutes before. "You're sure no one suspects anything?" Captain Hartwell asked, his voice much colder than when he had spoken to the students. "Positive," the other man replied. "The security cameras in that section will be down for maintenance for exactly 30 minutes tomorrow night." "That gives us our window." Tommy's heart began beating faster. Even at 8 years old, he could tell this conversation was about something bad. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay hidden while still being able to hear. The man in the suit handed Captain Hartwell a thick envelope. "Half now, half when it's done. Remember, this never happened. You were never here and you don't know me." Captain Hartwell took the envelope and tucked it inside his uniform jacket. "Understood. The family will never know what hit them." At that moment, Tommy's shoe squeaked against the marble floor. Both men froze and turned toward the sound. Tommy quickly ducked behind a large decorative plant, his heart pounding so loud he was sure they could hear it. "Did you hear something?" the man in the suit asked, his voice tight with worry. Captain Hartwell stepped toward the door and looked out into the hallway. Tommy held his breath, trying to make himself as small as possible behind the plant. After what felt like forever, Captain Hartwell stepped back. "Just the cleaning crew," he said. "Let's finish this quickly." Tommy stayed hidden until he heard their footsteps walking away in different directions. When he finally emerged from behind the plant, his hands were shaking. He didn't fully understand what he had witnessed, but he knew it was something terrible. The bus ride back to school was quiet for Tommy. While his classmates chatted excitedly about the palace and the guards, Tommy stared out the window, replaying the conversation over and over in his mind. He kept thinking about Captain Hartwell's words. The family will never know what hit them. That night at dinner, Tommy tried to tell his grandmother what he had heard, but the words came out jumbled and confusing. His grandmother, Maria Martinez, listened patiently as Tommy struggled to explain about the secret meeting and the envelope of money. "Are you sure about what you heard, mijo?" she asked gently, using her special name for him. Tommy nodded earnestly. "I'm sure, abuela. Something bad is going to happen to the royal family, and Captain Hartwell is part of it." The courthouse was packed with people that Tuesday morning. Reporters crowded near the front, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Lawyers shuffled through papers while worried family members sat in the gallery. But all eyes were on the small figure sitting in the witness chair, 8-year-old Tommy Martinez. Tommy's legs didn't even reach the floor as he sat there, wearing his best clothes that his grandmother had picked out for him, a crisp white shirt, navy blue pants, and shoes that squeaked when he walked. His dark hair was neatly combed, but a small cowlick stuck up in the back despite his grandmother's best efforts. The boy looked tiny in the big courtroom, but his eyes showed determination that surprised everyone watching. He gripped the arms of the chair with his small hands, knuckles white with nervousness. The judge, a kind woman named Judge Patricia Wells, leaned forward slightly. "Tommy, do you understand why you're here today?" she asked gently. The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to tell the truth about what happened at the palace." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This case had captured the city's attention for weeks. A young boy was accusing Captain Richard Hartwell, one of the most respected royal guards in the country, of wrongdoing. Captain Hartwell had served the royal family for 15 years without a single complaint. He was known for his honor, his dedication, and his spotless record. The captain sat at the defendant's table, his military uniform pristine as always. His medals caught the light from the courtroom windows. He was a tall, imposing man with graying temples and kind eyes that had earned him respect from everyone who knew him. Next to him sat his lawyer, a well-dressed woman who had handled many high-profile cases. Tommy's story began 3 months earlier during a school field trip to the royal palace. His third-grade class from Lincoln Elementary had been excited for weeks about visiting the magnificent building where the royal family lived. They had studied the palace's history, learned about the royal guards, and practiced their best behavior for the special day. The palace was everything the children had imagined and more. Golden gates, manicured gardens, and guards in their ceremonial uniforms standing at attention. The tour guide, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Patterson, led the group of 25 students through the public areas of the palace. Tommy had always been curious about everything around him. While other children focused on the shiny decorations and fancy furniture, Tommy noticed details others missed. He watched how the guards moved, how they communicated with small gestures, and how they kept their eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual. During the tour, the children were told about the Royal Guard's important job of protecting the royal family. Captain Hartwell himself had appeared briefly to speak to the students about duty, honor, and service. The children were amazed by his uniform and the way he carried himself with such dignity. Being a royal guard is the highest honor, Captain Hartwell had told them, his voice strong and clear. "We take an oath to protect and serve with honesty and courage. Every day we prove ourselves worthy of the trust placed in us." The children had clapped enthusiastically, and Tommy had raised his hand to ask a question about the guard's daily routine. Captain Hartwell had smiled and answered patiently, making Tommy feel important and heard. But something happened that day that would change everything. Something that only Tommy saw, and something that would eventually lead them all to this courtroom. After the official tour ended, the children were given 15 minutes to use the restroom and get a drink of water before boarding their bus back to school. Tommy had finished quickly and wandered back toward the main hall, fascinated by a large painting of a historical battle scene. As he stood there studying the painting, he heard voices coming from a nearby corridor. The voices were hushed but urgent, and something about their tone made Tommy step closer to listen. He knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, but curiosity got the better of him. Through a partially open door, Tommy could see Captain Hartwell talking to another man in an expensive suit. The man was not wearing a uniform and looked nervous, constantly checking his watch and looking around as if afraid someone might see them. "The arrangements are all set," the man in the suit was saying. "The money will be transferred tonight just like we discussed." Tommy didn't understand what they were talking about, but something felt wrong. The way they were whispering, the way the man kept looking around nervously, and most importantly, the way Captain Hartwell was acting so differently from how he had been with the children just minutes before. "You're sure no one suspects anything?" Captain Hartwell asked, his voice much colder than when he had spoken to the students. "Positive," the other man replied. "The security cameras in that section will be down for maintenance for exactly 30 minutes tomorrow night." "That gives us our window." Tommy's heart began beating faster. Even at 8 years old, he could tell this conversation was about something bad. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay hidden while still being able to hear. The man in the suit handed Captain Hartwell a thick envelope. "Half now, half when it's done. Remember, this never happened. You were never here and you don't know me." Captain Hartwell took the envelope and tucked it inside his uniform jacket. "Understood. The family will never know what hit them." At that moment, Tommy's shoe squeaked against the marble floor. Both men froze and turned toward the sound. Tommy quickly ducked behind a large decorative plant, his heart pounding so loud he was sure they could hear it. "Did you hear something?" the man in the suit asked, his voice tight with worry. Captain Hartwell stepped toward the door and looked out into the hallway. Tommy held his breath, trying to make himself as small as possible behind the plant. After what felt like forever, Captain Hartwell stepped back. "Just the cleaning crew," he said. "Let's finish this quickly." Tommy stayed hidden until he heard their footsteps walking away in different directions. When he finally emerged from behind the plant, his hands were shaking. He didn't fully understand what he had witnessed, but he knew it was something terrible. The bus ride back to school was quiet for Tommy. While his classmates chatted excitedly about the palace and the guards, Tommy stared out the window, replaying the conversation over and over in his mind. He kept thinking about Captain Hartwell's words. The family will never know what hit them. That night at dinner, Tommy tried to tell his grandmother what he had heard, but the words came out jumbled and confusing. His grandmother, Maria Martinez, listened patiently as Tommy struggled to explain about the secret meeting and the envelope of money. "Are you sure about what you heard, mijo?" she asked gently, using her special name for him. Tommy nodded earnestly. "I'm sure, abuela. Something bad is going to happen to the royal family, and Captain Hartwell is part of it." The weeks leading up to the trial were difficult for Tommy and his grandmother. News reporters camped outside their small apartment building, hoping to get an interview with the boy who had uncovered a royal assassination plot. Maria had to take Tommy to school through the back entrance to avoid the cameras and constant questions. Some people in their neighborhood were supportive, bringing casseroles and offering words of encouragement. But others were suspicious and angry. Captain Hartwell had been popular in the community, and many people found it hard to believe that a child could be telling the truth about such a respected man. Maybe the boy made it all up for attention. Tommy heard one neighbor whisper to another as they walked to the grocery store. "Children say all sorts of things," another person added. "How can we ruin a good man's life based on what an 8-year-old thinks he heard?" These comments hurt Tommy deeply. He began having trouble sleeping and would often wake up in the middle of the night, worried that he had done something wrong. His grandmother would find him sitting by his bedroom window, staring out at the streetlights. Abuela, what if I remembered it wrong? He asked one night, his voice small and uncertain. What if I got Captain Hartwell in trouble for nothing? Maria sat on the edge of his bed and took his hands in hers. Mijo, you told the truth about what you heard. That's all anyone can ask of you. The police found evidence that proved you were right. You helped save the royal family. But everyone thinks I'm lying, Tommy said, tears starting to form in his eyes. Not everyone, Maria assured him. Detective Chen believes you. The prosecutor believes you. And most importantly, I believe you. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Detective Chen visited them regularly during this time, helping Tommy prepare for his testimony and making sure he understood what would happen in court. She explained that there would be lots of people watching, that lawyers would ask him questions, and that some people might try to make him doubt what he had seen and heard. The most important thing is to tell the truth, she reminded him. Don't try to remember more than you actually do, and don't let anyone pressure you into changing your story. Just say what you saw and heard exactly as it happened. The prosecutor, James Morrison, also met with Tommy several times. He was a tall, serious man who had been handling criminal cases for 20 years. At first, Tommy was intimidated by him, but Morrison proved to be patient and kind. Tommy, I know this is scary, Morrison said during one of their meetings, but you're going to be great. Do you know why? Tommy shook his head. Because you're telling the truth, and truth has a power all its own. When someone tells the truth clearly and honestly, people can feel it. Morrison explained that Captain Hartwell's lawyer would try to make Tommy doubt himself or get confused about what he had heard. She might ask you the same questions over and over, or try to make it sound like you couldn't have heard clearly from where you were standing. But you just stick to what you know, okay? Meanwhile, the defense team was preparing their own strategy. Captain Hartwell's lawyer, Patricia Wells, was an experienced attorney who specialized in defending people accused of serious crimes. She believed her client had made a terrible mistake but wasn't truly planning to go through with the assassination. Children are notoriously unreliable witnesses, she explained to Captain Hartwell during one of their meetings. Their memories are influenced by imagination, by what adults tell them, and by the attention they receive. I'm going to show that this boy either misunderstood what he heard or has been coached by the police to say what they want him to say. Captain Hartwell looked tired and defeated. The man who had once stood so proudly in his uniform now seemed smaller, older. Ms. Wells, I need you to understand something. That boy heard exactly what he said he heard. He wasn't lying or confused. Then why are you pleading not guilty? She asked. Because I wasn't going to go through with it, Captain Hartwell said quietly. I was desperate because of my debts, and I let myself get drawn into something terrible. But I never would have actually hurt the royal family. I was planning to warn them at the last minute. Can you prove that? Wells asked. Captain Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted. I can't prove what I was thinking. I can only tell you that despite everything, I'm not a murderer. The media coverage of the upcoming trial was intense. Television news shows debated whether an 8-year-old child could be a reliable witness in such an important case. Legal experts were divided on the issue. Children can be very observant, said Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who appeared on several news programs. They often notice details that adults miss because they haven't learned to filter out information the way adults do. However, they can also be influenced by suggestion and may not fully understand what they've witnessed. Other experts disagreed. This case is too important to rely on the testimony of a child, argued defense attorney Michael Roberts, who was not involved in the case but was commenting as an expert. A man's life and reputation are at stake, and the evidence against him comes primarily from someone who doesn't even fully understand what he supposedly overheard. The royal family themselves remained mostly silent about the case, though they did release a statement thanking Tommy for his courage and expressing their gratitude to the police for their quick action. Princess Catherine even sent Tommy a handwritten letter, which arrived at his apartment 3 days before the trial. Dear Tommy, the letter read, I want you to know how brave you are and how grateful our family is for your honesty and courage. Speaking up when you witness something wrong is one of the most important things a person can do, no matter how old they are. Thank you for protecting us. With much appreciation, Princess Catherine. Tommy treasured the letter and read it several times each day. It helped him feel more confident about what he had done and gave him strength for the difficult trial ahead. The night before the trial, Tommy had trouble falling asleep despite being exhausted. Maria made him warm milk with honey and sat with him in the living room. "Are you scared, mijo?" she asked gently. "A little," Tommy admitted. "What if I say something wrong? What if I forget something important?" "You won't," Maria assured him. "You have a good memory, and you've been practicing with Detective Chen and Mr. Morrison. Just remember to speak clearly and tell the truth." "Abuela, do you think Captain Hartwell is a bad man?" Maria considered the question carefully. "I think he made very bad choices, Tommy. Sometimes good people do terrible things when they're desperate or scared. That doesn't make what they did right, but it doesn't mean they're completely evil either. I don't want him to get in trouble because of me," Tommy said quietly. "Oh, me, Joe," Maria said, pulling him close. "Captain Hartwell got himself in trouble by planning to hurt people. You just told the truth about what you heard. You're not responsible for his choices." Early the next morning, Detective Chen arrived to escort Tommy and Maria to the courthouse. She had arranged for them to enter through a side entrance to avoid the crowds of reporters and protesters who had gathered outside. "There are people on both sides out there," she explained as they drove. "Some support you, Tommy, and some support Captain Hartwell. Don't let any of them upset you. Today is just about telling your story to the judge and jury." As they pulled up to the courthouse, Tommy could see the crowds Detective Chen had mentioned. Some people held signs that said, "Believe the children" and "Thank you, Tommy." Others held signs that read, "Free Captain Hartwell" and "Children Lie." Tommy pressed closer to his grandmother as they walked quickly through the courthouse corridors. The building seemed enormous and intimidating, with high ceilings and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. The judge, Patricia Wells, no relation to Captain Hartwell's lawyer, had arranged for the trial to be held in a smaller courtroom. To make it less overwhelming for Tommy, she had also ordered that no cameras be allowed inside the courtroom during his testimony. "This is a very serious case," she had told the attorneys during a pretrial meeting, "but our primary concern must be the welfare of the child witness. He will be treated with respect and courtesy by everyone in my courtroom." As Tommy entered the courtroom for the first time, he saw Captain Hartwell sitting at the defendant's table. The former royal guard looked different without his uniform, wearing a simple dark suit instead. Their eyes met for a moment, and Tommy was surprised to see sadness rather than anger in the man's face. The jury was made up of 12 ordinary citizens who had been selected carefully to ensure they could be fair and impartial. Among them were teachers, shop owners, a nurse, a retired factory worker, and others from all walks of life. Tommy took his seat in a special area reserved for witnesses and their families. His hands were shaking slightly, but he felt calmer now that he was actually here. Detective Chen had been right. Sometimes the anticipation of something scary was worse than the thing itself. The trial was about to begin, and soon everyone would hear Tommy's story. Judge Patricia Wells called the court to order with a firm tap of her gavel. The courtroom fell silent as she looked out over the packed gallery, then down at the attorneys and finally at Tommy, who sat between his grandmother and Detective Chen. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Judge Wells began, "you are about to hear a case that has captured the attention of our entire kingdom. The defendant, Captain Richard Hartwell, stands accused of conspiracy to commit murder and treason against the royal family. This is a serious matter that requires your careful attention and consideration." Prosecutor James Morrison stood to deliver his opening statement. He was a tall man with graying hair and a confident bearing that commanded attention. "Members of the jury," Morrison began, walking slowly in front of the jury box. 3 months ago, an 8-year-old boy named Tommy Martinez was on a school field trip to the royal palace. What he witnessed that day was nothing less than the planning stages of an assassination plot against our beloved prince and princess. Morrison explained how Tommy had overheard a conversation between Captain Hartwell and an unknown conspirator, how the boy had reported what he heard to his grandmother, and eventually to the police, and how that led to an investigation that uncovered a plot to poison the royal family. "You will hear evidence that Captain Hartwell accepted money to help murder the prince and princess," Morrison continued. "You will hear recordings of his voice planning the details of their deaths, and you will hear from a brave young boy who risked ridicule and doubt to tell the truth about what he witnessed." When Morrison finished, defense attorney Patricia Wells rose for her opening statement. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner, but Tommy could sense the strength behind her soft voice. Ladies and gentlemen, Wells began, my client, Captain Richard Hartwell, served this kingdom faithfully for 15 years. He protected the royal family with his life, earned countless commendations, and was trusted by everyone who knew him. The prosecution wants you to believe that this hero suddenly became a villain based on the confused recollections of a young child. Wells explained that children often misunderstand what they hear, especially when they're eavesdropping from a distance. She suggested that Tommy might have heard fragments of a conversation taken out of context, or that his memory had been influenced by the attention he received after reporting the incident. Captain Hartwell made some poor financial decisions, Wells admitted, and he allowed himself to be drawn into conversations with some unsavory people. But planning to murder the royal family? Never. We will show you that there is reasonable doubt about what really happened in that palace corridor. After the opening statements, Prosecutor Morrison called his first witness, Detective Sarah Chen. She walked confidently to the witness stand, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Morrison began by establishing Detective Chen's credentials and experience with child witnesses. Then he asked her to describe her first meeting with Tommy. Tommy was calm and detailed in his account, Detective Chen testified. He described not just what he heard, but where he was standing, what the men looked like, and how their behavior differed from what he had observed earlier. Most impressive was his attention to small details that proved accurate when we investigated. What convinced you that Tommy was telling the truth? Morrison asked. Several things, Detective Chen replied. First, his story remained consistent through multiple interviews. Children who make things up often change details each time they tell the story. Second, he included information that would be unusual for a child to fabricate, like specific timing about security cameras. Third, his emotional responses were genuine. He was clearly upset about what he had witnessed. During cross-examination, defense attorney Wells tried to suggest that Detective Chen had influenced Tommy's memory through leading questions. Detective Chen, isn't it true that children are highly suggestible? Wells asked. Some children can be influenced, Detective Chen agreed, which is why I was very careful to use open-ended questions and avoid suggesting answers to Tommy. But you did meet with him multiple times before the trial, didn't you? Yes, to help him prepare for testifying, not to change his story. Wells pressed further. Isn't it possible that Tommy heard something completely innocent, and your repeated questioning convinced him it was sinister? Detective Chen remained calm. Ma'am, we have recordings of Captain Hartwell planning to poison the royal family. Tommy's testimony led us to investigate, but the evidence speaks for itself. After Detective Chen, Morrison called the police officer who had conducted surveillance on Captain Hartwell. Officer Martinez, no relation to Tommy, testified about watching the captain meet with the mysterious man in the parking garage and recording their conversation about the assassination plot. The courtroom was silent as Officer Martinez played the recording of Captain Hartwell discussing the timing of the poisoning and the payment he would receive. Even from the witness stand, Tommy could see several jury members shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they heard the captain's voice, planning the murders. And you're absolutely certain this is Captain Hartwell's voice on the recording? Morrison asked. Absolutely certain, Officer Martinez replied. I had met Captain Hartwell several times in my duties, and I recognized his voice. Immediately, the prosecution then called a banking expert who testified about the unusual cash deposits Captain Hartwell had made to his account in the weeks leading up to his arrest. The amounts were far more than his regular salary could account for, and they matched the payment schedule that had been discussed in the recorded conversations. By the end of the first day, the prosecution had built a strong case with physical evidence and recordings, but everyone knew the most important moment would come when Tommy took the stand. That evening, Tommy sat with his grandmother and Detective Chen in a hotel room near the courthouse. They had moved him there for his safety and to avoid the crowds of reporters. How do you think it went today? Tommy asked Detective Chen. Very well, she assured him. The jury heard the recordings and saw the evidence. Tomorrow, you just need to tell your story clearly and honestly. What if Captain Hartwell's lawyer is mean to me? Tommy worried. Judge Wells won't let anyone be mean to you, Detective Chen explained. If you don't understand a question, just say so. If you need to take a break, just ask. And remember, you're not there to prove anything. You're just there to tell the truth about what you saw and heard. Maria tucked Tommy into bed that night, just as she had every night since he was 3 years old. Tomorrow is a big day, mijo, but you're going to do great. Abuela, what if people still don't believe me after I testify? Then that's their choice, Maria said gently. You can only control whether you tell the truth. You can't control whether people choose to believe it. The next morning, Tommy woke up early. He put on his best outfit again, the same white shirt and navy pants he had worn on the first day of the trial. Maria made him his favorite breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, though he was too nervous to eat much. When they arrived at the courthouse, Prosecutor Morrison met with Tommy one last time before his testimony. Remember, just answer the questions I ask, Morrison reminded him. Don't try to add extra information unless I specifically ask for it. And if Ms. Wells asks you something you don't understand, it's okay to say you don't know. What if I start crying? Tommy asked. Then you cry, Morrison said simply. There's nothing wrong with showing emotion when you're telling the truth about something that scared you. As they walked toward the courtroom, Tommy could hear the murmur of voices from inside. The gallery was packed with people eager to hear his testimony. News reporters from across the kingdom had come to witness this unprecedented moment, a child testifying against a respected royal guard in a treason case. Judge Wells had cleared the courtroom of most spectators during Tommy's testimony, allowing only essential personnel, family members, and a small number of reporters. She wanted to minimize the pressure on the young witness. The prosecution calls Tommy Martinez to the stand, Morrison announced. Tommy stood up on shaky legs. Detective Chen squeezed his shoulder encouragingly, and his grandmother whispered, "You can do this, mijo." As Tommy walked toward the witness stand, every eye in the courtroom was on him. He could feel the weight of their attention, but he kept his focus on Judge Wells, who smiled kindly at him. The court clerk, an elderly woman with a gentle voice, asked Tommy to raise his right hand. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Tommy said, his voice clear despite his nervousness. He climbed onto the witness chair, his feet still not quite reaching the floor. The microphone was adjusted to his height, and a small stool was placed under his feet to make him more comfortable. Judge Wells leaned forward slightly. "Tommy, are you ready to answer some questions?" Tommy nodded, then remembered he needed to speak out loud. "Yes, ma'am." The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. Tommy was about to tell his story to the world. Prosecutor Morrison approached the witness stand with a gentle smile. He had spent years questioning witnesses, but he had never had a more important 8-year-old sitting before him. "Tommy, can you tell us your full name and how old you are?" Morrison began with simple questions to help Tommy feel comfortable. "My name is Tommy Martinez, and I'm 8 years old," Tommy replied, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Do you live with your grandmother?" "Yes, sir. I live with my abuela Maria. She takes care of me." Morrison nodded encouragingly. "Tommy, do you remember going on a field trip to the Royal Palace?" "Yes, sir. It was 3 months ago with my class from Lincoln Elementary School. Can you tell us about that trip?" "What did you see there?" Tommy's face brightened slightly as he remembered the exciting parts of the visit. "We saw lots of beautiful rooms with fancy furniture and paintings. The tour guide, Mrs. Patterson, showed us around and told us about the history of the palace. We learned about the royal guards and how they protect the royal family. Did you meet any of the royal guards that day?" "Yes, sir. Captain Heartfelt came to talk to our class. He was wearing his uniform with shiny buttons and medals. He told us about being a royal guard and how it was an honor to protect the royal family." Morrison walked closer to the witness stand. "What did you think of Captain Heartfelt when you first met him?" Tommy glanced briefly at the defendant's table where Captain Heartfelt sat watching him. "He seemed really nice and important. He answered my question about what guards do every day, and he made me feel like my question was smart. Now, Tommy, I want you to tell us what happened after the official tour ended." Tommy took a deep breath. This was the hard part. We had 15 minutes to use the bathroom and get water before going back to school. I finished quickly and went back to look at a big painting of a battle scene. "Where was this painting located?" "In the main hallway, not far from where our tour ended. It had soldiers on horses and cannons and looked really old." Morrison pulled out a diagram of the palace layout. "Tommy, I'm showing you a map of the palace. Can you point to where you were standing when you looked at the painting?" Tommy studied the diagram carefully and pointed to a spot in the main corridor. "Right here next to the big windows." What happened while you were looking at the painting? I heard voices coming from somewhere nearby. They were talking quietly, but I could tell something was wrong by how they sounded. What do you mean by something was wrong? Tommy scrunched up his face trying to find the right words. You know how grown-ups sometimes whisper when they don't want kids to hear? It was like that, but also nervous and scared sounding. What did you do when you heard these voices? Tommy looked down at his hands. I know I shouldn't have, but I got curious and moved closer to listen. I followed the sound to a door that was open just a little bit. Could you see through this open door? Yes, sir. Not everything, but I could see two men talking. Morrison showed Tommy a photograph. Do you recognize either of the men in this picture? Tommy looked at the photo, which showed Captain Hartwell in his uniform. That's Captain Hartwell. He was one of the men I saw. Are you certain it was Captain Hartwell? Yes, sir. I had just seen him with our class, so I remembered what he looked like. Plus, he was still wearing his uniform. What about the other man? Can you describe him? He was shorter than Captain Hartwell and had dark hair. He was wearing a really nice suit and had a gold watch that he kept looking at. He seemed nervous and kept checking around like he was afraid someone would see them. Morrison nodded. Now, Tommy, this is very important. Can you tell us what you heard these two men saying? Tommy closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating hard. The man in the suit said something about arrangements being set and money being transferred that night. Then Captain Hartwell asked if anyone suspected anything. What else did you hear? The man said security cameras would be down for maintenance for 30 minutes the next night. He said that would give them their window. Tommy's voice got quieter. Then he gave Captain Hartwell an envelope. Did you hear what was said about this envelope? The man said it was half now and half when it was done. He told Captain Hartwell to remember that it never happened, and they didn't know each other. Morrison could see that Tommy was starting to look upset as he recalled the conversation. Tommy, did you hear anything else that worried you? Tommy nodded, his eyes getting watery. Captain Hartwell said something that really scared me. He said the family will never know what hit them. A murmur went through the courtroom. Even though the jury had heard the recordings, hearing it described by the child who first witnessed it made it feel more real and frightening. What did you do after you heard this conversation? I tried to stay hidden, but my shoe squeaked on the floor. Both men stopped talking and looked toward where I was. I hid behind a big plant and held my breath until they went away. Were you scared? Very scared, Tommy admitted. I didn't understand everything they were talking about, but I knew it was something bad. Especially the part about the royal family not knowing what hit them. Morrison walked back toward the prosecutor's table. Tommy, what did you do when you got home that day? I tried to tell my abuela what I heard, but it was hard to explain. She listened to me and asked questions to make sure she understood. Did your grandmother believe you? Yes, sir. Abuela always believes me when I tell the truth. What happened next? Abuela called the police. It took a while before someone would listen to us, but then Detective Chen came to talk to me. Morrison gestured toward Detective Chen, who was sitting in the gallery. Did you tell Detective Chen the same things you've told us today? Yes, sir. The same story because it's what really happened. Tommy, has anyone told you what to say here in court today? No, sir. Detective Chen and you helped me practice answering questions, but you always told me to just say what I remembered. Has anyone promised you anything for testifying today? No, sir. Well, except Princess Catherine sent me a nice letter saying thank you. This brought a few smiles to the courtroom, even from some of the jury members. Morrison looked at Tommy with respect. Tommy, looking back, are you glad you told someone what you heard? Tommy thought for a moment. Yes, sir. Even though it's been scary and some people are mad at me, I think the royal family needed to know someone was trying to hurt them. Thank you. Tommy, I don't have any more questions. Judge Wells looked at the defense table. Ms. Wells, you may cross-examine the witness. Defense attorney Patricia Wells stood up slowly. She had a kind face, but Tommy could tell she was going to ask him difficult questions. Hello, Tommy, she said gently. I know this is hard for you, and I'm going to try to make my questions as easy as possible. Okay, Tommy replied quietly. Tommy, you said you were looking at a painting when you heard voices. How far away were you from the room where the men were talking? Tommy looked at the palace diagram again. Maybe, like from here to the back of the courtroom? That's quite a distance. Are you sure you could hear clearly from so far away? Yes, ma'am. The hallway has those high ceilings that make sounds carry, and they were talking loud enough for me to hear, even though they were trying to whisper. Wells nodded. You mentioned that you were curious and moved closer to listen. Do you remember exactly how close you got? I got close enough to see through the door that was open a little bit. Tommy, when grown-ups are having private conversations, they usually close the door completely. Doesn't it seem odd that they would leave it open if they were planning something secret? Morrison started to object, but Tommy answered before he could speak. I thought that was weird too, but maybe they were watching to make sure no one was coming. Wells was impressed by Tommy's thoughtful answer. Tommy, you said the man in the suit seemed nervous. How could you tell he was nervous? He kept looking around and checking his watch. My abuela does that when she's worried about being late for something important. When you heard the phrase, the family will never know what hit them, did you immediately think that meant something bad? Tommy considered this carefully. Not right away. But with everything else they were talking about, the money and the secret cameras and stuff, it sounded scary. Wells continued questioning Tommy for another 20 minutes, trying to find inconsistencies in his story, or suggest that he might have misunderstood what he heard. But Tommy's answers remained consistent and thoughtful. Finally, Wells asked her last question. Tommy, do you understand how serious it is to accuse someone of planning to hurt people? Yes, ma'am, Tommy replied solemnly. That's why I made sure to tell exactly what I heard, not what I thought I heard or what I wanted to hear. Just the truth. Thank you, Tommy. No more questions. Judge Wells smiled at Tommy. You did very well, young man. You may step down now. As Tommy climbed down from the witness stand, he felt both relief and exhaustion. He had told his story, and now it was up to the jury to decide what to do with it. After Tommy's testimony, the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations. Many people in the gallery were visibly moved by the young boy's clear, honest answers. Several jury members had taken extensive notes during his testimony, and their faces showed they were taking his words seriously. Tommy returned to his seat between his grandmother and Detective Chen, feeling drained but proud that he had told his story completely and truthfully. Maria squeezed his hand and whispered, You did perfect, mijo. The prosecution called several more witnesses over the next 2 days. They presented the recorded conversations between Captain Hartwell and his co-conspirator, financial records showing the suspicious cash deposits, and testimony from Palace Security about the planned camera maintenance. The most damaging evidence came from the recording made in the parking garage, where Captain Hartwell could be clearly heard discussing the details of poisoning the royal family. When the audio played in the courtroom, several jury members looked shocked, and one elderly woman in the gallery gasped. Audibly, expert witnesses testified about the poison that was going to be used, a substance that would have killed the prince and princess within minutes, while making their deaths appear to be natural heart attacks. The testimony was technical and disturbing, painting a picture of a carefully planned assassination that would have succeeded if not for Tommy's intervention. Then it was time for the defense to present their case. Captain Hartwell's attorney, Patricia Wells, called character witnesses who testified about the defendant's 15 years of faithful service, his decorations for bravery, and his reputation as an honorable man. Captain Hartwell's former commanding officer, Colonel James Burke, took the stand wearing his dress uniform with its array of medals and ribbons. Captain Hartwell was one of the finest soldiers I ever commanded, Colonel Burke testified. He received the Medal of Valor for protecting a royal family member during a security incident 5 years ago. He literally put his life on the line for the people he's now accused of planning to kill. Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Morrison asked Colonel Burke, Colonel, in your experience, can financial desperation drive good people to make terrible choices? Colonel Burke looked uncomfortable. Unfortunately, yes. I've seen soldiers with gambling problems or family financial crises make decisions they never would have considered otherwise. Could such financial pressure explain why someone might accept money to betray their oath? Colonel Burke was quiet for a long moment. It could explain it, he said sadly, but it couldn't excuse it. Several of Captain Hartwell's colleagues testified about his character, but their testimonies felt hollow after the jury had heard recordings of his voice planning the royal family's murders. The defense also called Dr. Margaret Foster, a child psychologist, to testify about the reliability of children's testimony. Children under 10 often have difficulty distinguishing between what they actually experienced and what they think they experienced, Dr. Foster explained. Their memories can be influenced by suggestion, by attention from adults, and by their own imagination filling in gaps. But under questioning from Prosecutor Morrison, Dr. Foster admitted that Tommy's testimony had been remarkably consistent and detailed. This particular child does seem to have an unusually good memory for details, she conceded. The most anticipated moment came when Captain Hartwell himself took the stand in his own defense. He wore a simple dark suit instead of his uniform, and he looked older and more tired than he had just months earlier. Patricia Wells began by asking him about his military service and his dedication to protecting the royal family. "I spent 15 years of my life serving the crown," Captain Hartwell said, his voice steady but sad. "I took an oath to protect the royal family with my life, and I meant every word of that oath." "Then how do you explain the recordings we've heard in this courtroom?" Captain Hartwell took a deep breath. "I was drowning in gambling debts. I owed more money than I could ever repay on my salary. These people approached me and offered what seemed like a solution to my problems." "Did you intend to go through with the assassination plot?" "No," Captain Hartwell said firmly. "I told myself I was just gathering information, that I would find a way to expose them without hurting anyone. I was planning to warn the royal family at the last minute. Why didn't you go to the authorities immediately when you were approached?" Captain Hartwell looked down at his hands. "Because I was a coward. I was ashamed of my debts and afraid of losing my position. I thought I could handle it myself." During cross-examination, Prosecutor Morrison was relentless. "Captain Hartwell, you took money from these conspirators, didn't you?" "Yes, but I wasn't going to keep it." "You provided them with detailed information about the royal family's private dining schedule, didn't you?" "Yes, but I thought I could warn the family before anything happened." "You discussed the timing of when the poison would take effect, didn't you?" Captain Hartwell hesitated. "Yes, but you told your co-conspirator that the family will never know what hit them, didn't you?" "Yes, I said that, but I was just playing along to maintain my cover." Morrison looked at him skeptically. "Captain, if you were planning to warn the royal family, why didn't you do it immediately after that first conversation that Tommy overheard?" I was still trying to gather more information about the full extent of the plot." "For 3 months? You gathered information for 3 months without warning anyone?" Captain Hartwell had no good answer for that question. The closing arguments began the next day. Prosecutor Morrison spoke passionately about the courage of a young boy who risked everything to tell the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Morrison said, 8-year-old Tommy Martinez could have kept quiet about what he heard. He could have decided it wasn't his problem, but he chose to speak up even though he knew adults might not believe him. Morrison pointed toward the defendant's table. "Captain Hartwell wants you to believe he was planning to back out of this plot. But where's the evidence? Where's the phone call to warn the royal family? Where's the report to his superiors? The only evidence we have is recordings of him actively participating in planning their murders." "Don't let a man's past service excuse his present crimes," Morrison continued. "Yes, Captain Hartwell served honorably for many years, but when faced with financial pressure, he chose to betray his oath, his country, and the people he swore to protect." Defense attorney Patricia Wells made her closing argument with obvious emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're asking you to destroy the life and reputation of a decorated war hero based on what an 8-year-old boy thinks he heard," Wells said. "Children make mistakes. They misunderstand things. They get confused about what they see and hear." Wells acknowledged that Captain Hartwell had made serious errors in judgment. "My client got involved with dangerous people and made terrible decisions. But planning to commit murder? The evidence for that comes primarily from a child who was eavesdropping from a distance." "Richard Hartwell is not a killer," Wells concluded. "He's a man who made desperate choices when faced with financial ruin. But he never intended to harm the royal family he had spent his life protecting." Judge Wells gave the jury their instructions, explaining the law and the standards they must use to reach their verdict. The jury needed to decide not just whether Captain Hartwell had planned to participate in the assassination, but whether he had truly intended to go through with it. "You must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty," Judge Wells explained. "If you have reasonable doubt about his guilt, you must find him not guilty." The jury retired to deliberate at 2:30 in the afternoon. Tommy and his grandmother waited in a small room near the courtroom, along with Detective Chen and Prosecutor Morrison. "How long do you think they'll take?" Tommy asked. "It's hard to say," Morrison replied. "Sometimes juries reach a decision quickly and sometimes they deliberate for days." At 6:00 p.m., word came that the jury had reached a verdict. They had deliberated for only 3.5 hours, which surprised many of the legal experts following the case. The courtroom filled quickly as word spread. Tommy felt his heart beating fast as they returned to their seats. Captain Hartwell stood at the defendant's table with his attorney, his face pale but composed. Judge Wells called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a middle-aged teacher named Robert Chin, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." "On the charge of treason against the crown, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." Captain Hartwell's shoulders sagged as the verdicts were read. His attorney put a comforting hand on his arm, but he looked like a man whose world had just collapsed. Judge Wells thanked the jury for their service and scheduled sentencing for the following week. As the courtroom began to empty, Captain Hartwell turned and looked directly at Tommy. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom. Instead of anger or resentment, Tommy saw something unexpected in the former guard's face. Gratitude. Captain Hartwell nodded slightly at Tommy, as if to say thank you for telling the truth, before being led away by court officers. Tommy felt tears forming in his eyes, not from joy about the verdict, but from sadness about how everything had turned out. He had done the right thing, but it still felt painful to see someone's life destroyed, even someone who had planned to do terrible things. "Come on, mijo," Maria said gently, taking his hand. "Let's go home." As they left the courthouse, Tommy was surprised to see crowds of people waiting outside. Many of them began clapping when they saw him, and several people called out, "Thank you, Tommy. And you're a hero." But Tommy didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a boy who had done what his grandmother had taught him to do: tell the truth even when it was hard. 1 week later, Tommy and his grandmother returned to the courthouse for Captain Hartwell's sentencing. The gallery was less crowded this time, with mostly reporters and legal professionals in attendance. The circus-like atmosphere from the trial had faded, replaced by the somber reality of a man facing the consequences of his actions. Judge Wells took her place at the bench and called the court to order. Captain Hartwell stood before her, wearing the same dark suit he had worn throughout the trial. His lawyer stood beside him, along with Prosecutor Morrison representing the state. "Before I impose sentence," Judge Wells said, "I want to address something that has weighed heavily on my mind throughout this case. Mr. Hartwell, you served this kingdom faithfully for 15 years. You earned the respect of your colleagues and the trust of the royal family. What happened to lead you down this path?" Captain Hartwell cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I have no excuse for my actions. I allowed my gambling addiction to cloud my judgment and compromise my integrity. When I couldn't see a way out of my debts, I made choices that betrayed everything I once stood for." "Do you have anything you would like to say to the court before sentencing?" Captain Hartwell turned slightly to look at Tommy, who sat in the gallery with his grandmother. "Your Honor, I want to say something to young Tommy Martinez." Judge Wells nodded. "You may address him directly." Captain Hartwell's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Tommy, I want you to know that you did exactly the right thing. When you heard something wrong, you spoke up, even though it was scary and even though adults might not believe you. That takes real courage." Tommy felt tears starting to form in his eyes as the man he had helped convict continued speaking. "I want you to understand that what happened to me was not your fault," Captain Hartwell said. "I made my own choices and I have to live with the consequences. You should never feel guilty for telling the truth." He paused for a moment, then continued. "I spent 15 years protecting the royal family, and in the end it was an 8-year-old boy who protected them from me. You're more of a hero than I ever was." The courtroom was completely silent. Even some of the reporters wiped away tears as they watched this exchange between the convicted traitor and the child who had exposed him. Judge Wells allowed the moment to settle before proceeding with the sentencing. "Richard Hartwell, you have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and treason against the crown. These are among the most serious crimes in our legal system." She detailed the evidence that had convinced the jury of his guilt, including the recorded conversations and his acceptance of money to participate in the assassination plot. "However," Judge Wells continued, "I must also consider your years of faithful service and the fact that you ultimately did not carry out the planned attack. While this does not excuse your crimes, it does factor into the sentence I will impose. Judge Wells sentenced Captain Hartwell to 25 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder and 15 years for treason, to be served concurrently. With good behavior, he could be eligible for parole in 12 years. Additionally, she said, you will forfeit all military honors and benefits, and you are banned from ever holding any position of public trust. Captain Hartwell accepted the sentence without emotion. He had expected much worse and seemed almost relieved that the uncertainty was finally over. As the court session ended, Captain Hartwell was led away by officers. Before leaving the courtroom, he turned one last time to nod at Tommy, a gesture of respect and gratitude that Tommy would never forget. Outside the courthouse, Detective Chen spoke to the gathered reporters. This case demonstrates the importance of listening to children when they report witnessing something wrong. Tommy Martinez showed tremendous courage, and our investigation confirmed that his testimony was completely accurate. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to normal for Tommy and his grandmother. The reporters eventually moved on to other stories, and the crowds of curious onlookers disappeared from their neighborhood. Tommy returned to school, where he was treated as something of a celebrity by his classmates. Some wanted to hear his story over and over, while others seemed almost afraid of him, as if his involvement in such a serious case made him different from other children. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was careful to treat him the same as always, though she did arrange for the school counselor to meet with Tommy regularly to help him process everything that had happened. "How do you feel about everything now?" the counselor, Mr. Williams, asked during one of their sessions. Tommy thought carefully before answering. "I'm glad the royal family is safe, and I'm glad I told the truth. But I'm sad about Captain Hartwell. He seemed like a nice person when I first met him." "It's okay to feel sad about what happened to him," Mr. Williams assured him. "You can be glad you did the right thing and still feel sorry that someone got hurt because of their own bad choices." 6 months after the trial, Tommy received an invitation that surprised everyone. The royal family wanted to meet him in person to thank him for his courage. The meeting took place at the palace, in the same building where Tommy had first overheard the conspiracy. This time, however, he walked through the front doors as an honored guest. Prince Michael and Princess Catherine received Tommy and his grandmother in a beautiful private sitting room. The prince was a tall, dignified man in his 40s, while the princess was younger, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Tommy," Prince Michael said, shaking the boy's hand formally, "our family owes you a debt we can never repay. Your courage and honesty saved our lives." Princess Catherine knelt down to Tommy's level. "I want you to know how proud we are of you. Speaking up when you witness something wrong is one of the most important things anyone can do, no matter how old they are." They presented Tommy with a special medal, the Order of Courage, which was rarely given to civilians and had never before been awarded to a child. The medal was beautiful, with a golden ribbon and an inscription that read, "For extraordinary courage in service to the crown. We hope you'll remember this day not because of the terrible things that almost happened," the princess said, "but because of the good that came from one brave boy telling the truth." Tommy treasured the medal, but what meant even more to him was a request the royal family made. They asked him to participate in a program that would teach other children about the importance of speaking up when they witness wrongdoing. "We want other children to know that their voices matter," Prince Michael explained, "that adults should listen to them when they report seeing something wrong." Tommy agreed to participate, and over the next year, he visited schools throughout the kingdom, sharing his story with other children. He always emphasized the same points. Tell the truth even when it's scary. Adults should listen to children, and sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it's always worth it. "What if the grown-ups don't believe me?" one young girl asked during a school visit. "Keep trying," Tommy told her. "Find someone who will listen. My grandmother believed me and Detective Chen believed me. There are always good grown-ups who will listen if you keep looking." The conspiracy that Tommy had uncovered turned out to be larger than anyone initially realized. Captain Hartwell's arrest led to the discovery of a network of extremists who had been planning to destabilize the kingdom. Several other arrests were made, and additional security measures were put in place to protect the royal family. The man in the suit who had been meeting with Captain Hartwell was eventually identified as Marcus Webb, a businessman with connections to several radical political groups. He was arrested 6 months after the trial and sentenced to 30 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. 2 years after the trial, Tommy, now 10 years old, received a letter that surprised him. It was from Captain Hartwell, written from prison. "Dear Tommy," the letter read, "I hope you are doing well in school and that life has returned to normal for you and your grandmother. I wanted you to know that I think about our encounter in the courtroom often, and I remain grateful that you had the courage to tell the truth. I am using my time in prison to get help for my gambling addiction and to think about the choices that led me here. I have started teaching literacy classes for other inmates, trying to do some good to make up for the harm I almost caused. I hope you continue to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The world needs more people like you." The letter was signed simply, Richard Hartwell. Tommy showed the letter to his grandmother, who read it carefully. "What do you think, Abuela? Should I write back to him?" Maria considered the question. "That's up to you, mijo. He did terrible things, but people can change and try to do better. If you want to write back, you can. If you don't want to, that's okay too." Tommy decided to write a short reply, wishing Captain Hartwell well and hoping he would continue to make good choices. It felt like the right thing to do. As Tommy grew older, he never forgot the lessons he learned from that experience at the palace. He understood that adults weren't always right, that sometimes children saw things that grown-ups missed, and that speaking the truth was more important than being popular or avoiding trouble. He also learned that life was complicated, that good people could make terrible choices, that doing the right thing sometimes hurt people you didn't want to hurt, and that courage wasn't about not being scared, but about doing what was right even when you were scared. The medal from the royal family sat in a place of honor in Tommy's room, but the real treasure was the knowledge that when faced with a choice between staying silent and speaking up, he had chosen to speak up. And because of that choice, 2 good people were still alive, and a little boy had learned that his voice mattered. Years later, when Tommy became a teacher himself, he would tell his students about the importance of courage, honesty, and speaking up for what's right. And he would always remember the day when an 8-year-old boy's voice was heard in a courtroom full of adults, and how that voice helped save lives and deliver justice. The story of Tommy Martinez became legend in the kingdom, not because he was perfect or special, but because he was an ordinary child who did an extraordinary thing. He told the truth when it mattered most. And that perhaps was the most important lesson of all.